Hello, and welcome to Off the Roll. I'm your host, Troy Hirschman. On today's podcast, we have Mark Lahr. Mark graduated from Ball State University in 1984 and soon became the longtime teacher athletic trainer at Ben Davis High School in Ben Davis, Indiana. Today, Mark and I talk about a lot of things. His educational experience at Ball State University, getting his first job, and even some current trends in athletic training right now. He was also on the forefront of being there to see the development of the accelerated ACL rehab, and the research that Mark DiCarlo was doing out of Methodist Sports Medicine in Indianapolis. So we have a great conversation. So let's go off the roll with Mark Lahr. Welcome to Off the Roll. I'm here today with Mark Lahr, longtime athletic trainer at Ben Davis High School and Ball State Athletic Training Education Program alumni. So welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Well, thanks, Troy. It's great to be here. I've been listening to many of the podcasts, and I've been thoroughly entertained and somewhat educated at times too.
Yeah, I get that. I've definitely been educated a lot on this. So we're going to get started with the kind of like what we started off with all the podcasts. Kind of how did you get started in athletic training? Who introduced you to it? And then we'll kind of just roll from there.
All right. So I was like most of the other people that have gotten into athletic training, I did a lot of athletics when I was in junior high, and after my freshman year, kind of like a Jay Bradley type story. Except it wasn't my dad that got involved. It was the high school basketball coach told me, you know what, you love basketball, but you're too short and you're too slow to play for us next year. So he got me involved with being a student manager. And in that first season with at Lafayette Jeff, I interacted with Bruce Johnson, who had, and Bruce had been there 3 or 4 years. He had replaced Corky Cordell, and when Corky passed away in '74, and I didn't know anything about athletic training. I knew of Corky because Corky's son Nick was my middle school football coach and a history teacher at Tippecanoe Junior High, but didn't know anything about athletic training.
So what was Corky's story? I mean, because obviously athletic training at the high school level was pretty unusual back then.
Right. So he was there. I'm not sure how long he was there. I think he was there from the early 60s through 74. I know that he was part of the basketball teams with Joe Heath and Marion Crawley. But my parents were both from Lafayette Jeff, and they knew of Corky. Corky's family also owned the Frozen Custard in town, which is a long time ice cream place, and that's a whole different story. But yeah, they were kind of tied into that.
So was Corky like, was there a Purdue connection there too, or was it?
That's a good question. It may have been. I know he's in the IATA Hall of Fame. Okay, but I don't know. So my guess is his connection with Pinky Newell probably precipitated that.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
But
all right.
But yeah. I know that when he passed, it was pretty important for Lafayette Jeff to find a replacement. They found a really good one with Bruce.
Okay.
So I'm starting out as a manager, and Brian Curlis, who is not a Ball State grad, but I know you know Brian because as a master's student, he's tied into Ball State, and he's tied in with Rex and Neil and all those guys during that late 80s time when he was at Earlham as the athletic trainer.
Yeah.
So Brian and I met our sophomore years because we were both managers. And then Bruce sent Brian and I and 2 other guys to Miami of Ohio to Ken Wolfert's athletic training camp down at Miami of Ohio. So I did that. That was the summer of 1977.
Yeah.
And so I was a student manager / student trainer for the following 2 years for all 3 seasons. So Brian and I did football, we did basketball together. Brian did baseball, I did track. And as we're finishing up high school, my intentions were I was coming to Ball State to go to architecture school. I had set up all my education with math and heavy and art classes and this, that, and the other. And like what, probably 1,000 kids a year that come to Ball State to get into architecture school, I didn't make the cut. So after my sophomore year after my freshman year, and I'm living in Howie Call, and guys were playing a bunch of intramurals, and I got my nose broken playing flag football, and that's an interesting story. So I get my nose broken during a game, and it's bleeding, and I run my hand down my nose, and my left middle finger falls into this big dent, and I've got a large lump in front of my left eye. There's a student athletic trainer, covering, and he's digging in his bag, grabbing gauze. I said, I think my nose is broken. He says, well, you don't. And he looks up and he says, oh my God, your nose is out of place. And I have no idea who, that could have been Tom Ford. It could have been, so I got there in 79. So it could have been that group that were seniors about that time.
Yeah.
So my freshman year finishes, I fail in English class, don't get into architecture school. My dad says, well, you're going back. What do you think you're going to do? And I said, well, I think I'll go talk to the athletic training people. So fall starts, classes start. Don and Jim are the two athletic trainers at that point. And I go into Irving Hall. I go into the training room, and Jim's sitting in the office covering stuff in the fall, and there's not a whole lot going on. And I come in, I said, well, I didn't get into architecture school. I'm thinking that maybe I want to switch and take a minor in athletic training. And Jim's, oh, okay, yeah, right. That would be interesting. I said, well, I was a student trainer in high school with Bruce Johnson at Lafayette Jeff. And he sits up in his chair and he says, oh, you went to Jeff? You work with Bruce? Well, congratulations, you're part of the program. Go grab a shirt off the hook. You can start doing your observation hours. And it's just like, oh, okay. So that was my introduction to it's who you know and what you've done that kind of get you not knocking on doors and not applications and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
So I did observations that first year and jumped into classes. At that time, it was still a minor. And the minor was folded into the School of Physical Education. So when I went to change my schedule all around, and we were on quarters at that time. So my fall quarter had already been set up the previous spring. So I really didn't get things started until that winter quarter. And realizing that there weren't a lot of people getting jobs in physical education in the early 80s.
Right.
I decided, I'm going to put this heavy math education that I have, I'm going to put that to work and make sure that I get a teaching job someplace. And then, my whole idea was, I'll be a high school athletic trainer. So I got into math. I noticed that with the minor, with the hours that I had for the minor, it only took me another 22 hours in a methods class to get a major in physical education. So I double majored in physical education and math education, and then minored in athletic training. So that extended, I was there for 5.
Yeah.
Well, so as I'm there, Tony was there as a student at that time.
Tony Cox, yeah.
Tony Cox was there as a student, and then Joe Harbottle was in Tony's class. Joe would have been in the class right behind Tony. There were some other guys, but in my class, so Monica Schrader and I are the same age, but she only took 4 years, so she was done a year before I was.
Yeah. Okay.
Todd Kiesling and I graduated together. Gary Higginbotham and I graduated together. Gary's now a physical therapist. He was over in Avon, Indiana, last time I knew.
Okay.
Bruce Reuter was still at Ball State when I left, because I think he was on the 3-2 program where he did 3 years of physical of athletic training and undergrad, and then he went and got his master's in physical therapy at Ball State, I think.
Yeah, the 3 year, as Neil calls it, the 3-year physical therapy school, because it was only there for like 3 years.
There's 1 or 2 classes. I mean, it was a great idea, and you'd think that it would have taken off, but it didn't.
Like a lot of things at Ball State, there was not enough foresight to realize that was going to pay off down the road rather than in the immediate future. And
and the one thing that did take off, that when I was in the School of Education, I got a chance to work with as the student representative, the early writing of the exercise science degree. So I got in on that with Dr. Reno. I've been busting I think it was Dr. Reno, Dr. Parks, and I can't remember who else that I worked with on that. But, basically they were doing all the work. And as a student, I was saying, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, that sounds good. Because they had kind of imagined it having a little bit more of a business aspect to it and not having the education classes to it.
Yeah.
And I know now that I think everybody's even changed those degrees over to kinesiology degrees. Is that
right?
Oops. That's kind of what I think's happened just from looking and seeing who's coming out.
Yeah.
So also in my class, and I think my area is a unique era, because certification was the gold standard, but it wasn't the absolute. So when I graduated from Ball State, there were an awful lot of athletic trainers in the state of Indiana that were good practicing athletic trainers, but for some reason had gone through a program and not passed a certification exam. And we had two of those that I think were pretty good athletic trainers, and Rick Yurko and Bruce Gordon.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if those names have come up. I'm sure I wish JD was still around, because if I'd say Bruce Gordon, I know that his ears would perk up in a hurry with that, because he and Spruce Bruce got along pretty famously.
Well, and Rick Yurko's son at one time was a football manager here. That's been several years ago.
Oh, sure.
Rick would come down and stuff, and he goes, I was in the athletic training program, but I never sat for the exam because I got a teaching job, and by then it was like too hard. I was starting a family, and I was okay with that,
Yeah.
But he goes, I still tape a few ankles every now and then, just to do it, just to show I can do it. But yeah.
Well, and I know that I think he taught at Jimtown. I'm not sure if he's retired yet or not.
I got to think that he's getting pretty close.
Yeah, because he's my age. He may be a year older than me. So he's 62. So I'm sure, but Jimtown's probably one of those places where they kind of it's a small enough place. They keep their own and they take care of their own. And there's no reason, unless you've got something more to do, there's no reason to necessarily get out of education.
Right.
So,
that was an interesting, and I know that Tony, and I'm going to talk to him about this when I have his one-on-one podcast, but I know Tony didn't take it for a long time. I mean, it was, it wasn't like till like 88 or 89, maybe, that he ended up, maybe 87, that he finally sat for the exam and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. He was practicing at Ball State, in those early 80s, not sitting for the certification exam. Yeah.
That does sound familiar. I probably forgot that, because I do remember. So I'm also in the unique position where Tony and I work football together. He graduates, goes to Miami of Ohio for a year, and comes back.
Yeah.
And he's the assistant athletic trainer, and I'm still a student.
Yeah.
So, and at that time so Jim also left during that time, and Myron Unzicker took Jim's place.
Yeah.
And I used to see Myron at the national conventions every once in a while, but I haven't touched base with Myron for a long time.
How was Myron? I mean, that was the thing about it. I've not heard a lot. I mean, I've heard Tony talk a little bit about Myron, but again, you had Don, who was Don, and I'm going to talk to Don too. That's the thing about too. I just got to figure out a time to put that. That may be after the basketball season's over with, but I think Don has a more reflective perspective. When I talked to him last December, he has a more reflective view now of how things were, and his view in my conversation with him was very like he has no regrets, but I think he understands that he could probably treated people a little bit better in some cases, but that's just what it was in that time period. So, but Myron, I haven't heard a lot about Myron as an athlete trainer. And so what's your perspective on Myron?
Myron was a good yin to Don's yang.
Okay.
So, and I thought Jim was too, but, and Jim was an instructor, and I may have had Myron only for the taping classes, because I think Jim left after my second, maybe my third year in the program. No, it would have had to be my second. So I had Jim for the modalities class and the rehab class. And then Myron was I had Myron for the one taping class. But Myron was kind of hang loose type guy. Myron would have fit in well with that group with Rex and Neil and such not. So when I am traveling, and at that time, we didn't sign up for, the only sports we were really assigned to was football. No one ever got assigned to basketball. The way it kind of worked to get your observation hours and to see a bunch of sports is on the one chalkboard in that inside athletic training that was inside the guy's locker room.
Yeah.
There'd be a chalkboard with all the home events listed and some of the away events listed. And students would just sign up to cover things.
Okay.
So I never had an assigned girls sport to me, but I didn't cover girls basketball. I didn't cover boys basketball ever. I covered a bunch of practices for the boys. I didn't go over to ball gym and cover too many of the girls practices.
Yeah.
I covered we still had women's gymnastics. My first year in the program, we still had wrestling and we still had men's gymnastics.
Yeah.
So I covered those. And I traveled with wrestling. And then I was assigned to fall football twice. I wasn't assigned to spring football, and I was assigned to baseball and track. And track was the other place that I got a chance. It was Kiesling and I, and there probably was a female assigned to the girls, but it was yours, ours, and it was just a hodgepodge when you go to a track meet because both females and males would be there.
Right.
And so you were always traveling. So, but Myron was pretty laid back. One of the funnier stories I have with Myron, and he always talked real slow and real calm, and he had that mustache that would roll into his mouth, and he'd just be laid back. Well, I'm supposed to cover the home boys basketball game one night, and it's snowing hard, and it's a heavy snow. And I get a phone call from Myron, and he's talking a million miles an hour. And he said, "Mark, the ball game's over. We've canceled the ball game." I said, "Okay." I said, "What's going on?" He says, "The field and sports building just collapsed." And that's when we had that Quonset hut.
Yeah.
And all that snow was on top of the field and sports building. And it just, baseball and track and softball were all in there. Well, they heard it starting to fall. And Myron was out in the gym with the shoot around, and he said that you heard and all the dust, because it was one of those floors that was like a clay court, tennis court. So all that dust blew down the hallway and then into Irving Gym and just coated Irving Gym with all this brown dust. And Myron was just talking a million miles an hour, just going, "Oh my God, nobody's hurt, but man, the field building." So of course I got out in the snow and I walked over, and there was a bunch of people that had taken trays from the cafeteria, and we were all sledding off the top of the field and sports building down into that parking lot right behind Irving Gym. So, that was kind of cool, but Myron was kind of that way. He would go, Don and one student would usually travel with football, and then Myron would drive up the next day with a couple more students.
Right.
So we drove to Bowling Green to do that. We drove to Toledo to do that.
Yeah.
So that was a morning. You get up, you drive like hell to get there, and then you drive like hell to get back. I did go an overnight with football to Northern Illinois, and this would have been my last year.
Yeah.
Because Harbottle had graduated, passed the exam, and he was a graduate assistant at Northern Illinois. So we get over there, we're playing Northern Illinois. Lee Corso's the coach. The week before, they had lost to Northwestern to snap Northwestern's record-setting losing streak. So we're going to play them on a Saturday night. So on Friday night, they're having a big party. Northern Illinois is having a big party for Harbottle about passing his certification exam. And it was there that I met a guy by the name of Pete Just.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, Pete's the athletic trainer at Lawrence North High School. So I got to know Pete real well. I met him first at Northern Illinois, and then I met him down there. So we played that football game at Northern Illinois, and we win. But the last play of the game, our defense is on the field, They run a play, they cut block our nose guard and blow out his knee. And as soon as the clock went on, their band rushes on the field. So Don and I think Dr. Habansky were in the middle of the field, and the band's marching back and forth around us as his kid's down. And we finally get him off the field and get him to the locker room. Don was a little upset with that.
Yeah, I bet he was.
Felt like the officials, and they basically, as soon as we got in the locker room, as soon as the band left the field, they turned the lights of the stadium off. So everybody's getting on the buses in total darkness as we're getting ready to leave. It's like, okay, we lost 2 games in a row. We don't like this. We're shutting things off and we're going home.
The old Dandy Don, turn out the lights, the party's over.
That's right. And the other thing I remember about Don would always say, if you got time to lean, you got time to clean. And I know I'm not the only one to use that phrase in this podcast.
Tony still uses it. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, that's, and you bring that up. I bring that up every now and then around here. We really don't have any students left around here. We have, because of the interlevel master's program. So I would offhandedly say that to the rest of our younger staff, and they just look at me like I'm from outer space. And
sure.
I just had a discussion with one of our other assistants here about how far we've dropped in the aspect of how we're trying to keep stuff clean, and it's impossible to try to do healthcare and try to keep up with the facilities and stuff. And I was mopping a floor over Christmas break because we were tracking stuff in, and I said, I can't take this anymore. I just got to do something about it. So while our team was in weights, I'm mopping the floor, and nobody knew. I didn't care either, because it was what I had to live with. But you're right. I mean, that's the thing about it, is that, and Tony still tells, I was laughing because he actually came last Tuesday because we played Miami at home, and he had asked me, and that's really the first time he's been back as stayed and watched a game since he left here. So 15 years. And they basically came back to heckle me because my tickets are right on the end of the bench. You can see me from the end zone seating, and they basically brought his staff back. But I was laughing at the girls because he goes, oh yeah, he brings that up all the time. If you got time to lean, you got time to clean. And he goes, we have people come in and clean our facility. But he's always honest about doing that. And I go, well, that's just what it is. I mean, that's what you're entrenched in. So yeah.
Well, and I think the thing that's interesting is I see a lot of, and I'm not sure we'll see them now with the master's entry program, but down in this area, I saw a lot of students go from being an undergrad to maybe covering a high school for a year, and suddenly they become clinical assistants, which I think is great. I mean, athletic trainers are great at doing that,
right?
But when they come in, that is what their job's all about, is because they're rooming patients. They've got to, particularly during this pandemic, they're scouring the room and they're taking the paper off the table for the next patient. And they're doing a lot more cleaning now than I think they had before.
Right. Yeah.
But so that adage kind of comes back. I think the other thing that's happening is, like you said, because of the master's level entry program, everybody kind of feels, there are times that people feel that, okay, that's beneath what I should be doing. That's not what I'm here to learn. But that's part of it.
No, it is part of it. And you have a certain, I guess, standard of healthcare that you're providing, and keeping that stuff up is a big part of that. So that the next person that comes in feels like, and I'm always about perception, particularly in this facility, about, it's a medical facility. It's not a locker room. And you have to treat it as that. But unfortunately, we're having a tough time. We've got actually tiles off the floor and stuff like that. I don't know. I've thrown up my hands. Right. It's basically what it came down to. So
well, I think and we could get off on a whole different subject where
we could.
Where when you start looking at athletic administration, you can't have it both ways. You can't have us there and say, okay, we built your room and now our job's over. You've got to continue to support us.
Right.
Because Lord knows when the wheels fall off and it's a medical emergency during a ball game, we're the only ones you look to, and you expect us to take care of it.
Yeah. It would be, that's a whole different piece with that.
It is.
So
it is.
one question I got that I haven't asked, because I've asked a lot of people like before that, what was Bud like as a teacher? What was JD like as a teacher?
JD was kind of loose, but the thing that I liked about JD is JD we'd read the information, and then JD would tell us how he applied the information.
Okay.
So I wouldn't, I had some unbelievable professors when I was at Ball State that taught really hard stuff. And I think that what Jim was teaching was challenging, but he realized it wasn't earth-shaking stuff, that if you stop and thought about it and you knew the anatomy, you're going to come up with the answer. But he would always give his perspective in the modalities class. We were big, and so when I was there, we used a lot of ice. Don used a lot of ultrasound. We talked a lot about doing contrast baths. And so the way Jim kind of opened it up was, okay, now with contrast baths, it's not just ice cup and ultrasound. What other ways can you do contrast baths? And then it's the cold and the hot whirlpool. I don't think Jim was a hard teacher. You kind of understood what was going to be on the test. I don't think I saw a lot of people failing what Jim was teaching, but I think, to Jim's credit, he never put it in a situation where he would put us behind the 8 ball and fail us. And I had enough of professors like that in the math curriculum that were definitely that way.
Yeah.
You had to rise to the occasion instead of just learn the material and learn to apply the material.
Yeah, it sounds like he was more concerned about you applying that knowledge rather than getting an A or a B on a test.
Absolutely.
It was more about going out into the field and using what he taught you than passing a test and getting a grade and kind of just digesting the information with that. So
absolutely. I think there was a good connection between being in the field and being in the classroom. And at that time, I think we were required to get like 1,600 hours over a 4-year time period and field work. And I think if we had a major, it was only 800 hours or something like that. Well, most of us, I think I had 3,200 hours by the time I graduated, because that's where I like to hang around. So, I did a lot of that stuff. And I think that's the one thing that and I know you've touched on it with the master's level entry program, is that we're missing out on that. I had an interesting question. I still do. I go to Franklin College and I go to UIndy once a year to talk to their master's class, and I'm taking all the braces that I'm selling when I'm working for Methodist / Forte. And I had an interesting question. This is the first time I had this question, because I gave my background, and this one young lady says, so do you think it was harder on you that you didn't have a major in athletic training? Did you have to learn all this stuff on the fly? And I said, not really, because where you're going to class a bunch and then you're getting 20 hours a week. I said, I was getting 25 hours a week, 4 years long. And then I was coming in early in the summer, and I was going to cover this in the summer and hooking up with other athletic trainers. So I said, my experience was really wide, and I was learning it in the field. Now, I'm not sure if I've heard that classes are learning to start IVs and listen to heartbeats using a stethoscope, and they're starting to learn what's right and what's wrong. Well, we never had that, and that was never something we needed to learn. However, just being around some of the docs I was around, there were other ways to pick that pocket, other ways to take care of that.
Yeah, no, I think that, again, I don't disagree with what they're teaching. I think that that it still depends on whether your team physician or your supervising physician are going to let you do that. Number one, I had a conversation with Jay Match at one time where, he asked me just kind of out of the blue, do you think you'd like to learn how to do suturing? And I go, no, because I'm never going to do it enough. And where I'm going to do it at is I don't want that responsibility. I don't think that, it's just like, you want me to teach you how to tape an ankle, and you do it once a year, twice a year, whatever.
Right.
And he agreed. We kind of chuckled about it, but I think staying in your lane in some cases is okay. It's okay to learn that stuff. And
Absolutely.
I've often said that probably putting an IV in would be beneficial for me, because I probably would do it more than once or twice a year,
Right.
depending on where I'm at with guys, or if you're out at football or whatever, then you're probably going to do that more. So there's some useful knowledge in there. But I always felt like my learning experiences were, because I was more hands-on, probably like a lot of us, like you too, is
Yep.
that my learning experiences were not, I'd learned stuff in the classroom, but I really need to reinforce it in the field, and
Right.
to have those experiences and do that, where, from what I've seen here, I mean, they try to provide those experiences here, but, because of the expectations of the student athletes that a staff person is going to be working on them, there's not a lot of opportunities for those kids to have that.
Right.
Now, when they go to the high schools, again, because, and we'll talk about this more here, but there's only one person there, and there's all these high school kids.
Right.
They they get to do stuff. They get
Right.
to do things,
Right.
and I think that's fine too. But yeah, I was like you. I got a ton of hours. I hung out. I made opportunities for myself. I sought out those opportunities to have that clinical experience, to learn
Right.
those things. And again, when I was with the docs, I always paid attention. With Alan Hibansky and Jay Matchett and all the team physicians that I've had along the way, I still pay attention to that. And so that's where I picked up more of the medical stuff. I mean, when I was at Utah, I had a great primary care physician that took care of the gymnastics team, and she taught me a ton of stuff about, just general medical stuff, that she goes, you're going to need to do this on the road,
Well, my introduction to soft tissue mobilization wasn't an athletic trainer, but it was Pat Quinn when I was working baseball. He took, and I think it might have been Kiesling and I were working baseball together. And Pat got us in a dugout early in spring practice. And he said, when a pitcher comes out of the game, I want you to milk their arm.
Yeah.
And he had a hook in the dugout, and we'd hook, and we'd take rope with us to create a hook in opposing dugouts. And we'd start at the fingers, and that's one of those things that I think became valuable, because I used a ton of that at the high school, not just on pitchers, but I found that if I had a football player that had a stinger, and neurologically things were coming back, but they were still sore, well, they're all locked up in their scapula. So let's start at the elbow, and let's milk them through the shoulder, and let's get some joint lobes going on the scapula.
Yep.
And suddenly, hey, you know what? It's not sore, and I've got my strength back. We'll get back, get back to practice, and let's get you back going.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for learning something from everyone.
Absolutely.
whether it was an athlete trainer or not. So
yeah, and I also, I think that having the program be part of the physical education program, I think I've always approached athletic training as an educational and with medical application. So to me, it was, okay, I'm going to make some good decisions, but this athlete's going to be part of the decisions that I make. And they need to understand what I'm doing, because ultimately I want them to take care of themselves. Functional progression to me is nothing more than learning when I learned progressions through physical education with Dr. Schmotlak. It's just skill progression, and that's kind of the way I approached functional progressions. Well, you can't run until you can walk without a limp, and you got to be able to hop before you can run, and this, that, and the other. So it just all goes together to me.
No, and I think that's the thing is it's not, and it's not always just a textbook progression either. You gotta have some feel to where your patient, student athlete, wherever you want to call them, where they're at, to know what we're doing. And I think that's the other, you learned more about the feel part of it in your clinical experiences than you would have just been in a classroom reading it from a book and stuff. And again, I think this entry-level master's program, that they're going to tweak some stuff along the way, that hopefully that will kind of work itself out. But right now it's really new to everyone. And unfortunately or fortunately, those people are getting into the workforce. And I think it's funny that you see all these studies like, onboarding these new athletic trainers, that from these programs and what you're doing with them and stuff. I mean, you didn't have to do that before because they were getting that in their time there. And the one thing for us, I do think is going to be encouraging that we did get approved for a 3-2 kind of track, which will be beneficial, I think, in the long run, rather than just a two-year deal. But it's getting those kids up to speed in that a little bit to do that. So, yeah.
And I think the other thing that needs to come back, and we've kind of been away from them for 2 years, is I'm really looking forward to getting away from the virtual bladder, the virtual net, because the other thing that I was going to emphasize here is bladder was in my senior year. Bladder was in Indianapolis, so I remember Jim and I'm not sure who he was rooming with. But by that time he was with Kramer, so it may have been Jim and Glenn had a room, and that's where we hung out after talks, and anybody and everybody went through that room. So you touch base with all kind of Fawcett came back through, and there's so many names that I'm not going to bring them all up. I can't remember everybody, but everybody came through and you touch base, and I think that's missing too. And unfortunately, these kids that are getting started in this master's level entry program, they don't understand the networking yet. They don't see it, and so much of just listening to the podcast, and it is knowing the right people at the right time that know that there's a connection here, there, or the other.
And I think it's really cool that like you're in an area and you're coming in contact with a lot of our younger alumni from that undergraduate program that I told them, I said, Ball State is everywhere. Ball State athletic training is everywhere. You're going to be in some place that you don't even expect it. And somebody's going to come up to you and you're going to be talking to them and they're going to say, where'd you do your undergrad at? Or something like that. And you're going to say Ball State. And they're going to be like, oh, I know so-and-so. Or a lot of it was, I knew JD, or I knew Rex, or I knew, Neil. That's usually the one that comes up for those guys. And they just they're kind of blown away by the fact that there's that much connection in there. But now they're starting to see it, especially with, Dave Weichel has done it. He's still hiring other people from other programs, but he's still hiring some people from Ball State. And they're starting to see that cross section there with that. And I think it's really cool that they're absorbing that and going, wow. And like I've told a couple of them, now you're a part of that. You're a part of that group that people are going to be talking to you, and young students are maybe coming out of our program now are going to be talking to you, and it's on you to kind of promote that and help them understand that as well. So
I've had an opportunity to work with Courtney and Devin Cox. And them both. Now they basically, Courtney got there because Rob was still with Methodist at that time and hired her in, and so it's been a kind of an aha moment for Courtney. It's like, oh, you mean Neil's known people that far ago? And I'd say, I'm writing on the wall someplace in there, there's a bunch of stuff around. So, and that's been good because hopefully Courtney's always felt like when she was in a tight space and she needed somebody to help cover a tournament, she hadn't hesitated to call me. And that goes back to, hey, we're in this together, and we're both Ball State alumnus. And
no, it's I love Courtney, and the story I tell about her is when she was interviewing to get in the program, she was observing and she was frustrated because she had kind of come in like you a little bit. Like I was a different major, and I figured out that I didn't really want to do that anymore. And so she came in a little bit later on her observation hours, like a semester later. And I remember her in her interview, we asked her, like, what do you think is going to be the biggest adjustment from you being an observer to a student in the program? And she flat out came out and said, I'm actually going to get to do some stuff. And I said, I was like, hey, this is why
Yeah.
you get it. You already get it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that it wasn't like, well, they were all talking about schedules and hours and all this the other kids were talking about that stuff. But she just didn't even hesitate. Bang, I get to do some stuff. And I've always been endeared to her for saying
absolutely.
that, because
she kicked the
she got
door
it.
in. Yeah. She kicked the door and said, hey, flat out as I can get in and do some stuff. And that was, we had a really strong student program at Ben Davis between myself. Well, Dana Lyle
Yeah.
had worked for us for a while, and there were some students that came through with Dana. My one student that's got a degree from Ball State in athletic training and went on to be certified is Brian Steele.
Yeah.
Who's down at Richmond with Reed Hospital. And I think he's been down there since like 91 or 92.
Oh, yeah.
He's been there forever. His wife was actually a student in my geometry class when I was still teaching geometry. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just all that connections and the opportunity to get a hold of. And I sent a lot of students to some of the smaller schools and had them avoid Purdue and IU because those are Division I athletes. You've already taped people for 2 years. You've already taken care of basic first aid, and they're
Right.
not going to let you do that with their Division I scholarship athletes. You'd be a whole lot better to go to a Ball State, a Franklin, an Anderson, a Manchester. So we've had quite a few kids go that route to get in, because I realized sitting and waiting was not in their best interest.
Well, it's the same reason why I ended up, other than my poor academic performance in high school at Western Boone, and I ended up at Vincennes, and thank goodness there was somebody, and Mark Goodrich was there because he was like, hey, we can put you to work right now.
Absolutely.
Let's go.
Absolutely.
So
but and I think some of the students that I've had were academically challenged, but they were great with their hands.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple of them that did not get into programs, but found something that they could do their hands with. A young lady that she's now moved to Atlanta, Georgia, but she was working for DJO, selling bone stem units. Well, she left Ball State or left Ben Davis, couldn't find a program to get into academically. So she got her associate's degree in surgical tech, and for 12 years, she was scrubbing up in the emergency room down at Methodist and seeing all this heavy trauma stuff.
Right.
So she was coming back and telling me unbelievable stories.
Yeah,
but again, it was hands-on stuff, and she could always excel at hands-on stuff. So,
well, let's talk a little bit about you. You finished your time at Ball State. What was your next step?
So after I left Ball State, there was a high school job at Carmel that came open my last year, and Bruce Gordon ended up getting that job.
Okay.
The following year, I student teach. I really enjoyed teaching. I was down at, I student taught at Newcastle High School with Gary Lebo, and Lebo ended up being an athletic trainer over in Ohio, and I think he became the athletic director in Midland, Ohio. He'd be a good guy to get a hold of. I bet he's got a ton of stories. So Lebo and I would drive back and forth from Muncie to Newcastle every day. And Dwight Fraze was the athletic trainer there. And we were there in the spring of Steve Alford's freshman year at IU. So, and Gary was student teaching for Sam. Well, when they make the Final Four, Sam kind of gives Gary the keys and says, "You're teaching. I'm going to be gone from Wednesday of the week of the finals until Saturday when they play in the finals." So Gary just jumped in, and he was teaching all the classes, and we were staying late just so he could get things done. But so we did that, and then I got the job at Ben Davis, but I thought Ben Davis was part of Indianapolis public school system.
Okay.
And so I took an interview there, and I took an interview at Franklin High School. And Franklin didn't have an athletic training job open, but Ben Davis did.
Okay.
And when I found out that Ben Davis was not part of IPS, and that Dick Dullahan was coming back from West Point to be the head football coach at Ben Davis, I was a little bit more intrigued.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't have my certification at that time, so they hired me on as an athletic trainer and a math teacher. They told the math department chair, this is the guy we're hiring. And it was the first year teacher they'd had in the math department in a long time. And luckily, Tom Corwin was very patient with me, and I really enjoyed teaching for Tom. And that was a great experience. I had a real good support staff in that math department.
So what year is this?
This is 1984.
Oh, 94. Okay. So you graduated from Ball State in 84 or 83? 84? Yeah.
84.
Okay.
So yeah. So I ended up being at Ball State for 5.
Yeah.
So I get there, and Marge Abaum had been connected a little bit with the Ben Davis program, and it started a student training class there. And she had a former student by the name of Brett Cope.
Okay.
Who was a certified, and I wasn't certified. So Brett, even though he didn't have a teaching job at Ben Davis, he took this stipend and was just a full-time substitute, and he was doing the guys sports and I was doing the girls sports, and then teaching on the side. So I'm covering,
So is Brett, real question, so has Brett ever told you that he went to an athletic training workshop at Ball State?
No.
Yeah, he did. So when Don gave me some stuff, he gave me a box full of stuff like not this past December, but before that, he, Don kept everything pristine, records. So in there was when they had the athletic training workshop, like in, I think 75, 76, 76, 77. And Don had not only pictures, but had the list of everybody that were, Barry Clements was one of those students that came to that workshop, but Brett Cope was too. And
oh my God.
And so I laughed because and Vince Stilger's cousin came to that workshop, I think in 76, 77.
Really?
Yeah, because I emailed Vince about that. But there was a few, because I was just curious on who was that had come to that high school workshop, if they were actually athletic trainers, but Brett Cope was one of them. Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering how Curlis and I and Brian Martin and Jeff Tyson ended up at Miami.
I was going to ask that question too, but I figured there was probably a reason.
So Bruce was the one that kind of steered us that direction.
Yeah, it might have been timing, because I don't know when I've got the dates. I'm not sure when, but it could have been timing. But
and it could have been that the one at Ball State was filled up.
Yeah.
That we ended up in Ohio because Ball State was filled up.
Yeah, but yeah. So there was 2 years that they did that. 75, 76, 76, 77. But yeah, Brett was one of them that had come to that workshop.
Wow.
With that. Yeah, it's interesting. So I didn't know if you knew that or not, but there you go.
So Brett and I kind of worked together, and being out on my own for the first time was kind of strange, and I was trying to balance the new working full time and then doing the athletic training, because I was teaching five of the 7 periods I was teaching.
Oh my goodness.
And I didn't have a prep off for any athletic training stuff, but luckily I was in a 10th period study hall, so I could get myself to where I needed to be. And at that time, I had a girls basketball coach that he'd kind of let me have a say in what was going. I could observe and say, hey, I'm kind of seeing this, but I was kind of taking care of the girls, and that's what I was covering most. Was the girls. So they had, at that time, like Ball State, they had 2 different training rooms. The boys' training was downstairs in the boys' locker room. The girls' training room was an old concession stand that they turned into an athletic training room.
Okay.
So one October, I'm sitting up there, volleyball's finishing up. We're getting early parts of basketball season, and I hear what sounds like a huge fight in this upper gym. So I go popping out of the office, and I go sprinting down and I know I'm going to see this huge fight. What's the boys basketball team? And at that time, a guy by the name of Gail Tolles was their basketball coach, great guy, but he's trying to filter his team down from 50 kids, and he's rolling one ball down the court, and 3 guys have to chase down to get it. And it's a fist fight to see who's going to get the ball and then score. And he wasn't calling any fouls. I mean, it was just so. I decided, you know what? I may see as much contact up here covering early season basketball as Brett's seeing out at the stadium with Delahan coaching. So I'm going to all the football games, and Brett's covering things, and then Brett was getting kind of kind of tired of catching just a little bit of stipend and then the sub pay. So late in the spring, he started making plans, and that's when Brownsburg opened up their job description to bring an athletic trainer to Brownsburg.
Right.
So Brian Curlis and Brett Cope both applied, and Brett got the job. So in the spring, I was covering most of the spring stuff all by myself. I was traveling with track and covering home baseball and this, that, and the other. And
who were you seeing? Were you seeing any other athletic trainers when you were traveling with those teams?
So yeah, and at that time, so Tim Friend was up at Pike, and he was uncertified, and Dave Green was over at Warren Central, and he was uncertified. But then Stu Ball was down at Center Grove. He was not certified, but there were some certified. Buff had a Tim Munson, but he wasn't teaching it at Buff. He was coming in from one of the clinics, and Methodist had just started sending some athletic trainers to the clinics, and John McCarroll was our team doc.
Yeah, and that's really kind of when all that was getting started at Methodist too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I heard Jay talking about the first IATA meeting over at Butler.
Yeah.
And so that's the fall I get started, and Cope says, hey, there's going to be an athletic training meeting over at Butler during Teachers Institute. You need to come over. So I'm not from Indianapolis. I just start driving down 38th Street, and I can't find Butler University. So I drove around a good part of the morning and missed the meeting. I figured out where it was for the second meeting, and then I didn't miss another one after that.
Yeah.
But I remember when all that got started, and Jay was talking about how small a group it was.
Yeah.
And Jay was doing was wearing a bunch of different hats, and David Craig was wearing a bunch of different hats.
Yeah.
And Ralph, and then I think Denny Miller was heavy into that, and John Schrader from IU was a heavy IU influence. This was before Kip really got jumping in. But as far as certified athletic trainers in other places, I really didn't see a ton, other than if I'd go down to the clinic, they had a couple athletic trainers. Mark DiCarlo was working as a physical therapist, athletic trainer with Methodist, and McCarroll really encouraged me to hang out with Mark. And then I got hired in the summer by Chuck Combs, who's a physical therapist down here. Well, Chuck had been the assistant athletic trainer and physical therapist at Purdue in the late 70s, early 80s with Pinky, and Chuck was a Purdue grad. So I worked for Chuck and David a couple summers as kind of a PTA.
Yeah.
And then Chuck and David were both helping me study for the certification exam. So so I end up sitting for the certification exam in 85, and believe it or not, the part that I didn't pass, it still blows me away. I didn't pass the oral practical. I passed the written sim. You remember the written sim?
Oh, yeah.
Where you had the highlighter.
Yeah, you had the highlight stuff. Yeah.
So I passed that, and I passed the written, but it took me 3 tries to pass the oral practical. So which kind of I've never had a trouble talking. So why is that tough to pass that?
So do you remember who was in your oral practicals as your test administrators?
So the time I passed it, so this is 88, and Ben Davis had hired a biology teacher by the name of Robin Brooks. And Robin was certified, and she was through Steve's program, and then had spent a couple of years in Cincinnati, and was actually covering one of the lower league basketball leagues. Was one of the first females covering male basketball.
Yeah.
So she comes to Ben Davis, and I'm a little intimidated, but she's helping me study. So she's one of the models over there, and all I'm there for is to pass the oral practical. They take me into a room, and it's Jay, and it's Ralph, and it's somebody else, and they thought I was just in there to be social. I said, no, I'm supposed to be one of the ones taking the test. So they sent me back into the room to sit and stew for another 15 minutes. But when I passed the test, that's where I met Coddington. Was he was one of my proctors, and Ned Shannon may have been the model.
Yeah.
I think Ned even though Ned's younger than me, I think Ned got certified before me.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who the other guy on the proctors. So I passed that, and almost immediately, Coddington and I became close friends.
Yeah.
Almost immediately. So I get that, and then things are starting to open up. I think shortly, so it would have been 88, 89. Dave and Angie show up here at Ball State in Avon, or Brownsburg and Avon.
Yeah.
By that time, I know another athletic trainer that was already here is an older guy by the name of Tom Baker.
Okay.
Tom was certified, and he was a biology teacher at North Central. And then Tom retired from teaching, and I haven't seen him for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And then Lawrence North didn't have anybody. Lawrence Central, Glenn Foster. You know Glenn?
Okay. I've heard that name. Yes.
Okay, so Glenn, you'd know Glenn from Rydell. So he works for Rydell and sells stuff for Rydell, but he was also an athletic trainer at Bowling Green when I'd go over to Bowling Green with wrestling every once in a while. So I knew Glenn from that. Funny story about Glenn is, so that first year that I'm doing football, we go over to Lawrence Central, and it's a muddy field, and we're starting to put together a pretty good team together, and our sophomore quarterback drops back and gets hit on the front of the knee and hyperextends his knee, and he tore an ACL.
Right.
So I go out to this muddy field, and McCarroll's not there that night, and Ken gets on the field, and I do an anterior drawer, and the leg just feels like it's just going to keep coming to me. So I put the leg back in place, and Kent says, "What'd you do, Mark?" And I said, I don't think you want to know. And Glenn happened to see the positive test, is walking to me. He says, "What do you got?" And I said, "Glenn, I think he tore his ACL." He says, "From where I'm standing, I think he did too. Let's get him immobilized and give me the hell off the field."
Yeah.
So it was good to be connected with Glenn. And then, but then things started opening up. I think then Southport and Perry Township ended up hiring Dean Behrman and Mike Rudisill, and Mike's still at Southport. So things really started expanding. Pete Just eventually made it to Lawrence North.
Yeah.
They had a handful of people at Lawrence Central, and that's kind of solidified over the last, when the mid-conference came to play. Yeah. Whichever clinic's covering Lawrence Central has done a really good job of putting really good athletic trainers in there. Yeah. So and then in the summers in the 90s, again, I hooked up with Coddington and Jack Mansfield with the Hoosier State Games and the White River Park State Games. So and that's something that I'd love to have come back, because I think it would fill that void that we have with the MAT students. Yeah. Because we would get, we'd be covering so many sports, and we'd have 90 positions. Only about 40 of those positions would get filled by ATCs, and then the rest of them were college and high school students. Right. It would come on, and it would be 3 days of just sharing ideas and making sure that if I was at soccer on day 1, I'm at basketball day 2, and I'm at wrestling on day 3. So I'm seeing a lot of different people.
So who were the major participants in that? Were they high school kids? Were they college kids? Was it a mixture of both? Was it? What was it?
It ran, age groups ran from 12 to 40.
Okay.
I mean, there were adults that were wrestling. There were adults playing soccer.
Yeah.
The tennis and the golf were heavily influenced by adults, but it was all age ranges. So, my parallel was basically they took all the AAUs and just brought all their championships down here is what happened. Yeah. And, so Coddington and Steve Schindler kind of ran our biggest venue with soccer. So when things would close on the Friday night and Saturday night, everybody would end up out at the soccer venue, and there'd always be a cookout and drinking and night soccer and out in that area. But it was a great way to get to know a bunch of students, share ideas. Dr. Judy, I think, has been through Ball State twice. Lisa Judy. Yeah. She came down, she had heard about the Hoosier State Games when she was a student up at Hope College. Right. And came down and hung out with us a couple summers. And then she's been everywhere. Yeah. Now at Xavier. I mean, that's where she's at. She really? She's actually the department chair for their kinesiology, exercise science
departments that includes the athlete, the entry-level masters. I had breakfast with her when we played Xavier this year. I called her up and said, "Hey, we're in town. Can we hook up for breakfast?" And we talked for quite a bit on stuff. Yeah, she's at Xavier doing that now. And Lisa's a good, she again, one of those kind of people in education that was involved in the clinical side. And we used to tease her because that's how I got to meet her, was at Indiana State. She was in charge of the research lab in Indiana State.
Right.
And she would get bored over there, there's nothing going on. And I said, "Lisa, just come on over here and hang out with us, and I'll let you do some evaluations and stuff." And she got into a little bit of hot water for doing that, but she needed it. She still wanted to do it. And so we just tried to include her as much as we could. And then it was so awesome to have her here at Ball State and do that too. So
were you, when you were at Indiana State, was that when Vince Stigler was finishing his doctorate, and when they finished his doctorate, they wanted to bring him into the department?
No, that was I came in 98.
Okay.
When Dave Ralston and Lori Vanza were co-head athletic trainers, and that was kind of post. There was a guy in between Dave and Lori and stuff with that too. So and then that's kind of when that time was there. But yeah, that's when I was there for 5 years until 2002. That's when I was there. But one of the things I want to ask you real quickly too, you were obviously, there's a lot of things that were changing in the athletic training profession, but also a lot of things changing in sports medicine and orthopedics in Indianapolis.
Right.
And you were seeing that firsthand as an athletic trainer. So when you came in 84, they were just starting, Methodist Sports Medicine is just starting up with Dr. Brady and Dr. McCarroll. Who else would have, Dr. Shelbourne, those guys were kind of coming in and starting stuff. I mean, what were your opinions and thoughts? Like you just talked about an ACL. I mean,
right.
That's right when they were starting, Dr. Shelbourne was coming in and doing the scope / ACL reconstruction. And then you're working with Mark DiCarlo, who wrote the whole,
doing all the studies.
Yeah. Did all the studies on the fast, I shouldn't say fast track, but the more aggressive rehab from a functional standpoint. I mean, how did you feel about, like, did you like, are they crazy? What were your, what was your thoughts?
Well, so the ACL stuff that I was involved with when I was a student at Ball State, we'd had a defensive back who ended up being a football coach in the northern part of the state, a high school football coach, had torn his ACL, his MCL, stretched his deep peroneal nerve. So he was having drop foot.
Yeah.
And this was like my maybe my third year at Ball State. And I remember, I think Habansky did that ACL, but he was in a cast for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then he had a drop foot brace on as he was rehabbing. So do you remember Don always had a orthotron?
Yeah.
Back in that one room, and anybody that had a knee injury they were working out on the orthotron. So when I got to Ben Davis, we had a little bitty diver that tears her ACL, and I go in and watch her surgery with Dr. McCarroll, and she comes out in a cast, and we're working like heck to get her bent. And then the following year, when Kent tears his ACL, they start changing over what they were doing. He didn't come out in a cast. He came out with a knee immobilizer, but he's out of the mobilizer several times a day, and he's working motion. And so Kent tore that in September, and we were starting to have him run again in February. So that was still 5 months apart. And the problem that we ran into, and this was partly my fault, but I just didn't know any better, is he could gain speed. He didn't have the strength to decelerate. So he runs into a wall and breaks his left wrist during his knee rehab. So, and unfortunately, this was the athletic director's son too.
Yeah.
So So we figured that out. And then as they're starting to do more ACLs, we're probably sending them 2 or 3 a year. And we're really watching what Mark's doing, and our kids are the guinea pigs.
Yeah.
You know, they're coming to us, and we're starting to do more and more functional stuff. And then in the 90s, we actually had a kid that was a defensive back, a senior defensive back. He tore his ACL on the first day of contact. So that would have been the first week of August. And he works himself back, and we're being real functional with him. Come sectional football time, he's on the sideline and he's shagging punts after having his ACL reconstructed. And Carol and I start talking this kid could make it back and play, you know, if we play the whole tournament, and we did that year. George actually played in the semi-state, played most of the game in the semi-state, most of the game in the state final, and he was only 5 months post-op on his ACL. So that was kind of funky. And then we did have a kid in the early 2000s, and this kid was a freak of nature. But again, I didn't do this without McCarroll. This kid was such a freak of nature, really good wrestler. He tears his ACL in like the 3rd week of the season.
Yeah.
But he's a Medicaid kid, doesn't have any insurance. McCarroll's going to do his surgery for free. But as he's going through, even without having his knee reconstructed, he's starting to run drills. So the kid, unfortunately, was going to turn 19 the week of the state football championship. So McCarroll agreed, we've got to have him in a playmaker. He can play, but I have to look at him after every game. We have to make sure we're not tearing this knee up. So we're playing at Warren Central in the semi-state, and it's snowing on the field.
Oh, no.
And Todd's playing on the left defensive end side, and they run a sweep to our right side, and the guy's coming down the sideline. Todd Bernard hawked him down from the far side of the field, and from the line of scrimmage, came across the field and happened to tackle the kid right in front of John McCarroll and me. And John looks at me and says, "Fuck this. We're not doing surgery this week. I'm going to eat the cost of this surgery. He's going to play in the state final, and then we're going to fix him the day after the state final." So, and I'm sure what he was thinking is, the closest I can get to him to 19, you know, I can probably cover some of the cost through Medicaid. Right. So we win. He didn't have the surgery. We play in the state final, and Monday after the state final, we're in the gym celebrating, and Todd's having his knee reconstructed by McCarroll up in the north side. So, you know, that was kind of cool, but because he, you know, just like he did with some of the other rehabs, or his previous rehab before he had surgery, he was, by March, he was running full speed again.
Yeah.
I mean, but he was an absolute freak of nature.
Yeah.
I think he played 2 years at IU, but then academically he had some problems, and I haven't seen him since.
Yeah. But I mean, but again, it's just the idea that it's not all cookie cutter. You know,
no.
It's there are people out there that can do this, and they're depending on your judgment and the team physicians or the physician's judgment to say, hey, I think you can do this, or no, I can't. And I think that's the biggest thing it's exciting, and for you to kind of be on the front lines of seeing how that progressed from, like you said, from putting somebody in a cast to, we're going to put them in an immobilizer. And now we don't even really do that. We're going to miss CPM, you know, the day after surgery. Or even, I mean, on a personal note, I'm getting my left knee replaced in April, because years and years of just wear and tear and stuff. And I had my appointment, and they're going to keep me 24 hours just because of my cardiac situation, but 24 hours and I'm out. I mean, I very well could have gone home the same day had I not had my situation, you know, and that's a knee replacement. I mean, we've just flipped the page a little bit, and there's still sometimes that you need to be a little more conservative. And I think we all understand that. But I remember the first time I heard, as a student at Ball State, somebody having an ACL, and they're like, "Oh no, we're not gonna," you know, because I'd come from a high school where the kid had done it, you know, probably 86 maybe, and they were casting him up, and he was in that hinge cast brace for 6 months and all this other stuff, and now we're not even doing that, and now we're like we're itching. Like, I remember when I was at St. Joe's, you know, we were no CPM, we're just getting them up weight bearing we're going up and down, that's when we were using Arnett team physicians and he was like, no. And so that Sean Comer and I've talked about that we had 8 ACLs the year that we were at St. Joe's together, and every one of them did outstanding because we were doing early stuff. We were doing all that early stuff right on. So,
one of the other interesting things about that is one of the dads. So my kids went through Ben Davis in the middle 2000s, and there was another family that came through, and the dad had been a Dr. Brady patient.
Okay.
And that in that middle 80s, Dr. Brady was still doing surgery.
Yeah.
And so they had put a cast on Bob, and he early. So they tried to put him in a mobilizer, and he wore the mobilizer out of the appointment and threw the mobilizer away. And then 6 months into it, he's ahead of anybody else that had had their ACL replaced. And so he's part of that early DeCarlo study.
Yeah.
Well, what made it so successful? Well, I didn't listen to anything you said, and I got all my motion back, so I didn't have to fall and break that scar tissue. And I remember when Mark DeCarlo told me that was part of the protocol.
Yeah.
With ACLs is they'd be so stiff that you waited for the patient to trip and force flexion and tear that scar tissue up, and suddenly they'd have all their knee motion back.
Yeah.
And that does make sense that that's not what you'd want to have happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's they were so worried about that graft going bad, stretching, shear forces, all that stuff that that was what was going to save. I mean, doing that motion is what was going to prevent a lot of that. But
right. And that was one of the things of coming out at Don's program, where everybody that had a knee problem would use the orthotron.
Yeah.
And then having kids that were part of DeCarlo's study, they'd take them out of that full extensions type stuff, doing it with that shear force stuff, and having them do leg press and those things. That was kind of it's all about being functional. It's not about putting numbers up. It's about being functional. Now, unfortunately, I think the insurance companies still want to see numbers.
Oh yeah.
You still have to do the Cybex testing to show that the number's this, so you can progressive there.
And we still
doing responsible stuff.
And I'm kind of a hybrid. I kind of still do some Cybex stuff if warranted, but more kind of like the step between where you're functional to a point, but you're not ready to go to the weight room yet. And so I will still use the Cybex in that kind of, for like 2 to 3 weeks to get them built up so they can go in the weight room and do stuff a little more confidently with that. And that's where I've used that stuff. And our younger staff are like, why do we even use that machine? I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, Neil and I we actually did something about 3 years ago where our Cybex or 6000 died. It finally just bit the dust. Sure. And I found on this website called .med, this hospital in Jackson, Tennessee that had 2 of them. And we went down in a van. We made a bonsai run down in a van and bought both of these for $700. and then we contacted Humac and said, we've got 2 of them. If we can pick the best of both of them, and you'll upgrade it, you can have the other one and we'll take this one. And that's what we did. They came out and we had them out in our facilities, our receiving area. And they came in and we took the best of both of them and made one, and they took the other one and upgraded the one we had. I think out the door, it was like $1,000 that we did that. I know that poor hospital. They didn't know what they had.
No, they didn't. You talk about, so when I listened to Jay's podcast, he talked about Burt Goebel, and you knew Burt Goebel.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So Robin Brooks, when she came over to Ben Davis, she had known Burt because they're both out of Cincinnati.
Yeah. So
she gets to Ben Davis. We've got an ultrasound machine that's still inside is still tubes. It was built in 1961. And I had been using it, but I had to take an old knee pad and put it around the grip because the insulation around the grip had cracked, and I was getting shocked on the handle. It wasn't coming through the electricity, wasn't coming through the ultrasound head. but it was still an original crystal. So it was still a good ultrasound. You couldn't put it in water or do anything crazy like that.
Yeah.
So Bert comes over and Robin says, I want Bert to come over and let's see if we can get an E-stem machine and an ultrasound. And he looks at this machine and he says, my God, I can't believe you're still using that. So he made us a deal. And I think he took that machine and he may have put it someplace in a museum or this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
It was just old. But like you said, it was horse trading. It was, okay, we don't quite have the budget to get everything we want, but if we put this together and put that together, we'll be willing to take some used stuff.
Yeah.
And it'll give us the equipment that we think we need to have. And, so Bert, and then when we renovated in 2000, Bert came through and made us a deal on a bunch of equipment too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that ever happens.
No, I mean, and you got to take advantage of that when you can. So that's no doubt. Well, so how long were you at Ben Davis?
I was there for 32 years.
Okay.
So
how many states?
I was the athletic trainer there. We played in the. My internet connection's kind of breaking up. Can you still hear me?
I got you. Yeah, we're all we need is the audio, so we're good.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So how many state championships? Yeah.
So we went to, in the 32 years I was there, we went to 10 football championships and we won 9 of the 10.
Yeah.
Okay. Basketball, we went to 4 in a row and won the last 2. And I think you know Damon Frierson because he's an assistant at Miami.
Yeah.
And I think you were the athletic trainer at Ball State when Damon was playing at Ball State.
That
playing
was
at Miami. Was that still Tony?
No, he might have been. I was working basketball in '92, so I don't know when Damon.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Damon would have been. He would have been at Miami from '95 through 99.
That was still Tony. That was still Tony because Tony. It was 2006 is when Tony retired from here. But what was I going to say? But I think I've told you the story about my wife is good friends with Steve Whitty's sister-in-law.
Okay.
So Dan and Cheryl were at St. Joe's when Cindy and I met there, and so I got to know. Dan had introduced me to Steve a little bit during that time, and so. But again, I always thought that was kind of the heyday of Ben Davis boys basketball too.
Oh, absolutely. And then they kind of revived that when Mark James came up.
Yeah.
And Mark won a state championship. He hadn't won one in the 30 some years he was at Franklin Central, but he won one at Ben Davis. And then I think they've been in the state final in 2019. And Don Carlisle's got a pretty good team this year too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So
basically,
had a golfer that. So I had a golfer that won the state championship.
Okay.
Before the regional, he comes in and his back is just trashed. So we take care of his back, and he made it into the state finals, and then ended up being the medalist. And that was like, well, where the heck did that come from? So we've had some track kids win state finals and this, that, and the other.
Right. Yeah. You definitely have had a lot your hand in, and your assistants have had a hand in a lot of kids being really, really successful. And I think that goes without saying that they don't do that unless they have great athletic health care. And that's a credit to you and your assistants and the people that you had there for a while. I think Marcy Royalty was there with you for a while, wasn't she? Yeah. Yep. And so I always think that's really cool. And as much as we talk about, national championships for these college guys and all this stuff, I mean, those state championships mean just as much to you as anything ever means to for people at the college level and stuff too. Conference championships, of course now that's like a dime a dozen. We win a division champion, they want to talk about getting rings and all that stuff. And I laugh at that, because I'm like, you really didn't do anything to win a division. Sometimes we backed into a MAC West division championship, and fortunately they haven't gone that route. But I can see coaches. Oh yeah, we need to hang a banner or something. No.
They want their stamp on it. The first time, so we played in the state basketball championship in 92, 93, 94, I'm sorry, 93, 94, 95, and 96. And in 95, it was still a one-class basketball tournament.
Right, yeah.
So we're playing Lafayette Jeff in that morning game.
Yeah.
And Joe Heath, who had been that basketball coach that told me I was too short and too slow to play basketball at Jeff, is the athletic director at Jeff. So that was, and I had known Joe through a couple of contacts and had stayed in contact with him. But that was so much fun to be at the Final Four banquet, and he was at one table and we were at the table next door, and I was really happy for him, and he was really happy for me, and and then we beat him, so that made it even better.
So you retired from Ben Davis. I mean, you're trying to figure some stuff out. What led you to Methodist / we'll call it / Forte right now? Eventually we're going to get rid of the / and IU Health absorb the Methodist, and we're just going to call it Forte. But so how did that start?
So I reached out and I was looking I didn't want to get it out of athletic training, but I wanted to stop teaching full time and then doing the athletic training on top of that. IU had come in and they were now covering Ben Davis, and they had hired a full-time athletic trainer that was a former student of mine. So she and I were working together, and they had hired an athletic trainer for each of the 2 middle schools.
Okay.
So part of that is they were coming in and they were working 25 to 30 hours a week, and I was working the same. Well, I started looking at the money and what they were paying them and where my stipend was like night and day. Like I was making half of what they were making because I was having to be paid through the school system. And I started doing the math and started realizing, if I would stay in the school system until I was 65, my pension wouldn't be a whole lot more than it's going to be if I use my rule of 85 and step out. And at 55, I could find another job. And I still wanted to stay in athletic training. I just didn't want to work 80 hours a week. And my wife was teaching. So ideally I wanted something that would be done at 5. So Eric Hall contacted me and he told me, hey, I've got a position that's going to be part-time athletic training, part-time DME. Yeah. And it's kind of evolved into full-time DME, and then I'm doing athletic training as PRN. So I got an opportunity to help set up with Rob Craig, and Nate Hill was the real ramrod with the Grand Park. So we were covering Grand Park and doing a lot of stuff there. And that was a great setup. And I think that's one of the areas that I think in the future, when we can figure out how to get athletic trainers paid by outside entities coming in to run tournaments, that's going to be a great place for athletic trainers to be, because I think they can be their own bosses, they can set their own hours, and they can set their own pay rates. Now, unfortunately, it's going to be a 3-day tournament and you're going to work 45 hours in those 3 days, but that's going to make some flexibility for the rest of your life. Yeah. So I've been doing the DME thing now. This will be in June. This will be my 6th year at Methodist, and I've learned a whole lot more about insurance than I ever thought I'd have to know, and what a nightmare insurance is. So that's kind of been strange that way.
Well, on the flip side of that, we have a guy from Toronto that just had shoulder surgery, and his mom is a nurse up in Canada and came down, and she's like, I can't believe you got this scheduled so fast, and that it's going to be like, he's going to see who you want to see and stuff. And I'm like, well, explain to me what it's like in Canada. And she goes, oh no, this would be like, you'd be waiting 4 months to have this surgery done, and all this stuff. And I go, oh, well, there's standardized medicine right there, and so there's this balance of stuff that we complain about, but if we had it the other way, we wouldn't want it the other way either. So exactly. It is what it is with that, and you kind of take the good with the bad. But so finally, I'm going to ask you kind of the same question I've asked a lot of people at the end of this podcast, is that if you had any advice to offer a young certified athletic trainer, what would it be?
Well, I think the big thing is get out there and get as much varied experience as you can. I did have an opportunity, like in the late 80s. Mark DiCarlo called me up and asked me to go with he and Hunter Smith. They were going down to IU to talk to the undergrad class, and it must have been a 100 level class about what their different areas were. And I didn't know Hunter Smith from Adam at that point, but just in talking to those kids, I think the advantage of working a high school versus pigeonholing yourself into, hey, all I want to do is work professional football. Well, that's great to say. However, you get so much more flexibility when you're working at a university, whether you're working at a high school where you're covering everything.
Right.
I think that's the key. So I think my advice is for young athletic trainers, I think you've got to be really diverse in what you can cover and what you can think. Be open to suggestions. I think you've got to get as much experience. One of the mistakes that I think I made by having my athletic training be a stipend, I never felt like I could turn around and spend the money to get certified in certain things. So I've taken the Graston class, but I decided the $400 to get the Graston certification wasn't worth it. I've done all the functional movement screen. I use the functional movement screen all the time, and really I watch people walk down the street and I'm using the functional movement screen. They pick up a box. I'm grading. I'm giving them a 1 to 3 grade on,
exactly.
on how they did with their squat or their lunge, but I didn't take the time to go get certified. And I think that kind of hurt me, because early on in looking at the tactical athletic training, that's what people wanted. And I think I had interviewed for the same job that Anna Foster had when Anna went with Sorgi. And I think the big difference is I could tell them, yeah, I've done this. Anna could open up her portfolio and say, I'm certified in all these things.
Right.
And she's definitely the right person for the right job. But I think that's one of the things that here in the future, that get your degree in athletic training, but don't forget to get those other certifications and have it documented what you can do.
Yeah.
And then go out and see as many things as you can, and even in unconventional places. Go listen to what that coach has to say about what they think is functional. So it's a lean, mean world out there right now too. And
that's, I always would use the analogy to the students that you're building a house, and so when you get done with your education, you have the house, but what you furnish it with and what you add on the walls and
yes.
the amenities that you add in your kitchen, those are the things that you're just talking about. All those certifications and all that stuff that you're doing is what's going to really make it a home and that you're going to live in for a while. And that's the thing where trying to let them know that once you graduate, you're not done learning. And that's why I try to emphasize that to myself, is that I'm always trying to learn something different, new, whatever, and then integrate in my experiences with those things. And you have the advantage of doing those things too. And it definitely makes you a more savvy clinician, somebody that can say, yeah, I've seen this, but I do things a little differently than what I used to do. Definitely. Somebody was asking me the other day, is like, do you ever feel like you're old and stuck in your ways? And I go, well, I feel a little older, but I don't feel stuck in my ways, that I'm not willing to change a little bit along the way. And hopefully I never do, that we're just doing the same thing over and over again. I may do some things that are go-to things, but if I need to call an audible and do something a little bit different, I'm not afraid to do that either, or learn something different in that capacity. So.
See, and one of the things that I would like to learn, but I'm not sure that I would trust myself to do it, is I think that dry needling is an interesting technique.
Yeah.
However, in my experience with where my area was, I would never take dry needles into a high school.
Yeah.
And because I think I'd have a big line that people that would want to get stuck and think that that's the magic bullet. But the other thing is, and even in your situation, so if you're doing dry needling and one of those real super thin needles breaks off, you got to send them to the health center. I'd have to send them to an emergency room. And I'm not sure I want emergency room doctors saying, what's an athletic trainer doing sticking people with needles?
Yeah.
I think that opens a can of worms that
I think the message I've relayed is that somebody's asked me about that. I've had athletes ask me about that.
Sure.
And I said, I've learned enough techniques in my career that are not as invasive from a me puncturing you standpoint, that the risk benefit ratio for me is way too high to go to a dry needling course and dry needle you. I'm far enough in my career that I'm not about to screw that up. From that standpoint, I can do ASTM or trigger point therapy, and maybe it might take me a little bit longer to get to the destination that I want to get to, but I'll still get you there. It's just not going to be as immediate. If somebody really presses me for dry needling, we have enough younger staff here that doesn't seem to be as scared about that. I'll let them go do that if that's the case.
Sure.
But I think that's the thing about it, is that it's only as useful or effective for you as the amount of risk that you're willing to take. And you and I are both far enough in our careers that we're like, it's interesting, and I'm not opposed to learning something about that, but to actually use it on somebody, that it would have to be somebody that it'd have to be a special case in that capacity to do that. The one thing I feel comfortable about is that I need to learn, that I'm going to probably try to hook up this summer or the next year and a half, is the blood flow restriction strengthening stuff. I feel comfortable enough with that if I can find a course that isn't a big commercial, because that's really, it seems like that what's out there is that these companies are promoting this. You can go to this course, but we're gonna try to sell you on our equipment at the same time. If I could find a course that would be pretty neutral and teach the philosophy of it, and then I can make the judgment on what type of equipment that I want to purchase, then that I'd be really interested in something like that. But
and I think that's what they asked them. Courses have been interesting. Is okay, there are all kinds of tools out there. You don't have to buy the Graston tools. You can do different things. And I think that's the way, the other thing that I would say about your philosophy, and I agree with you, is if you do dry needling, they depend on you to come back and do the same thing if they get in the same situation. With at least trigger point and ASTM, you can at least, I'm not going to be able to be here all the time to do this to you. If you take this tennis ball, or if you take this foam roller, there are some self-mold, I'm going to teach you how to take care of yourself too. And I can come in and take care of the big things, but you can do maintenance to kind of take care of that. And I think that's a more healthy way to treat an athlete.
And that's exactly it. I mean, I try to, the kids that I work with, especially men's basketball players that have aspirations to go overseas and play, I try to tell them, like, you may not have somebody like myself there. In fact, I have given ankle braces because they've gotten taped for all 4 years and they want to go play overseas. And I'm going to say, listen, you probably won't have anybody over there that will tape your ankles. Or if they do, they're not going to know what they're doing. So here's some ankle braces. Go take care of yourself. But I'm also getting calls like at 11:30 at night going, hey, I just did this. and you probably have too. I mean,
absolutely.
I just did this. I mean, I had one kid that he was playing in Hungary and they wanted to do surgery on him. And he goes, well, I'll send you the MRI report. It's in Hungarian. And I texted him back and said, you call your agent and get your butt back over here because you don't know. And it turns out he just had an MCL sprain, like a grade 2 MCL sprain. He rehabbed for 2 weeks and went back and played. And they wanted to do surgery on him. And I'm like, I always tell those kids, like, don't be afraid to text me, call me, whatever, because you just don't have access to the same level of, let's face it, the same level of medical care that you had when you were over here. And so you're right. I mean, trying to teach them to take care of themselves is so important because they're not going to always have that avenue to go to. So, well,
have you met Heather McGowan? So Heather's the assistant athletic director at Ben Davis, but for 10 years she and I were a tag team athletic trainer. So she was the athletic trainer with girls basketball when they went on that string in the early 2000s and won a bunch of games. Well, one of her players played at Tennessee and then played professionally all over the world. Well, she blows her patellar tendon in China. And Heather gets a call at 4 a.m. Hey, I did something bad to my knee. I don't want any of these people to touch me. I'm trying to get to a plane. I'm going to get back to Indianapolis as quickly as I can.
Yeah.
So she flies back and immobilize her. Heather gets her to, I think, Shelbourne, and Shelbourne has to do the patellar tendon graft. And then Heather and I happened to be teaching summer school PE. So this girl's basketball player, she was getting ready to play for the Fever. She's coming in the summer and getting in the pool while we're teaching the swimming portion, so she can do her rehab. So we clear out an area so she can go do her rehab, and we're not interfering with her, and she's not interfering with us. But she showed up on a daily basis, and she played the next year for the Fever. But you're absolutely right. You never know when you're going to get that phone call.
Right.
Hey, I need a favor. What can I do?
Yeah.
Hey, I got 2 JD stories.
Okay, let's go
on record. Okay,
let's go.
So, and I think JD stories ought to be for the older of us. That ought to be a requirement for these podcasts.
Well,
so, and there are so many of them, but these are the 2 that I can really tell. In like 92, 93, Dana Lyle was working with me at Ben Davis, and we're getting ready to go up to Glada. And suddenly, like Indiana, we get this stupid ice storm that comes through and freezes everything up, and nobody can get up to Glada. We're looking at road reports that it's going to take us 16 hours to drive. So Jerry Smith, who was an athletic trainer, physical therapist, and we were going to room together up in Chicago. We decided we're going to take the Amtrak up. So he and I get on the Amtrak, and it took us 8.5 hours to get from downtown Indianapolis to the train station in Chicago. And we decide there's no way we're getting back on a train and going back to Indianapolis. So Jim's tearing down the Kramer booth, and Jerry and I are standing around talking, and Jim says, well, you can go back with me, but I can't get you all the way to Indianapolis. Yeah. So we helped Jim tear down the booth, and we stacked. I think he had a station wagon for some reason. Maybe it was a Jeep, but we've stacked everything in his bags, our bags, and the 3 of us are like sardines in this car, driving from Indianapolis around snow, this, that, and the other. And it didn't take us. It may have taken us 4 hours to get to Lebanon. So he gets us down to Lebanon, and he's telling jokes. I mean, just like he's just telling stories, and the 3 of us are laughing. How we didn't drive off the road is beyond me. And then in the middle 2000s, I go up to Ball State on a Tuesday night to see a football game because one of our kids is playing from Central Michigan, and it's raining cats and dogs. And I'm there with our head football coach and a couple other guys, and we're standing in the hall in the openings, the aisleways, and I see this bright red rain suit sitting on the 3rd row in the middle of rain, sitting all by himself. And I realize, oh, damn, that's JD.
Yeah.
So I go down there and sit by JD, and I said, what are you doing sitting down here by yourself in the rain? He says, oh, everybody else abandoned me. They're sitting up in the press box. He says, I can't watch a football game in the press box. I got to be down here where I can see what's going on. So he and I sat down there, and we told stories, and we talked probably the rest of the game. And I wasn't dry for 3 days after that. But that, that's the way I always remember JD is he was there for the long haul of it all.
Yeah, very much so. And gosh, I mean, he just it was the epitome of what an athlete trainer in my book really was. I mean,
absolutely.
It was hard work. It was laid back to where you didn't take yourself so seriously that you couldn't have some fun. But at the end of the day, it was serious enough that you knew how to take care of athletes. And my story is that and I've got stories too. But I remember we were working at Kramer Camp in June before I was heading out to the Eagles for my internship, and I was really nervous. And we're riding in this van together, and I just told him, I said, I don't know if I got it to do. I'm scared to death. I don't know if I'm going to be good enough. And he said, I don't give a damn what you do, but you better hustle your butt while you're out there. Just hustle. Just do that. He goes, the rest of it will take care of itself. And he was absolutely right. I mean, I was busting my butt. We would complain, but we were, and it just fell in line with whatever was going on in that internship. And that was a lot to say that's, you didn't have to be the smartest guy, because we had some guys there that I was with that were not the smartest guys, but we were all hard workers, and we all busted our butts, and we did our very best to help Otho and Dave take care of those guys. And that's all they really wanted anyway. So,
well, and that's what the athletes respond to anyway.
Yeah.
Is don't give them this complicated answer and not do anything for them. Show them how to do it. And when they get better, suddenly you can do no wrong.
Yeah.
And I've been in, one more story is I had a couple of really good football players. Well, Mark Zachary, who came down and played at Ball State in the middle 90s, was there. And we're hosting the county wrestling tournament. Mark's there, and I think Marcus Adams, who played at Eastern Kentucky, happened to be there. And some coach gave me a bunch of crap about pulling a wrestler off a mat. And Zachary stood up and Adam stood up, and they said, if this is the way Lahr says it's going to be, this is the way it's going to be, and there's nothing you're going to change about it. And these are 2 high school kids.
Yeah.
And they're getting to the face of this adult. And it's like you said, I busted my butt for them. So by God, they're not going to let anybody disrespect the guy and they're going to stand up and they're going to take care of things. One way or the other. And, that's when you're doing a good job, is when people do that crap for you.
Yeah. Well, listen, this has been awesome. And
I appreciate it.
And you've got some great stories and really answered my questions really well. So, because I threw some at you, I'm sure you weren't expecting, but that's what this is all about. And like I said, it would be, it would be cool to do, and I'll see if I can pull this off. But you're right, it would be cool, and maybe this summer we can do something, maybe like in person, as I upgrade my equipment a little bit. But I think it would be cool to do a Coddington U.
That'd be fun.
Jack Mansfield, and talk about the Hoosier State Games and that group that was there. If we have one of these iGoats events again that Vinny's putting together, because I think there's a lot of stories that could go along with that. In that time that would do that, and it would be a fun, and again, like I said, this podcast is about Ring of Honor, Ball State former athlete, trained students and stuff like that. But I'm going to have a couple of guests on here in the future that are not going to be Ball State connected. Bill Bean at Utah, I really want to get on here, because Bill was the head athletic trainer at Utah, but also the first athletic trainer, like David was, for the Utah Stars. And I know, and Moses Malone, when Moses Malone's rookie year, I mean, I know that he's told me some of those stories. And, he's another one that's got some interesting stories that I want to get down and recorded. I'm going to have Brian Maddox and Paul Calloway on, because they've got all the JD stories about being on the road. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so it's not. Have you
been able to talk to Mark Smith?
I have not. I need to connect with Mark a little bit too. Yeah.
Because I know there are a bunch of stories there.
Yeah.
Mark reached out to me. I've got a former athlete that's a scout with the Ravens.
Okay.
And so David comes back to Ben Davis, and he said, "How the hell do you know Mark Smith?" I said, "Well, Mark was finishing up at Ball State he said, I happened to mention I was from Indianapolis and played at Ben Davis, and he said he knew exactly who you were."
Yeah.
I said, it's all Ball State connection.
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Yeah. Well, listen, thanks again for spending your Sunday afternoon or early part of Sunday afternoon. Now, hopefully we can all go home and watch the playoffs.
Absolutely.
Enjoy that. But I really thank you for being on here, Mark. So just stay on here, make sure I can get this thing downloaded real quickly, and then I'll let you know, and we'll go from there. So we've gone off the roll with Mark Lahr.
I want to thank Mark for coming on the podcast today. It was a great conversation and also a great time to visit with him. He's got some great stories and some great insight, especially about athletic training around Indianapolis back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. So I really appreciate him sharing his story today. If you have any feedback, hit us up on offtheroll, all one word, at gmail.com. And we really have some hopefully some exciting podcasts coming up here in the future. Maybe not Ball State people, but some great connections anyway. And I'm really looking forward to it. So everybody have a great day.